Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Wednesday, September 4th. Hope everyone had a good end of summer in the Northern Hemisphere. As telegraphed in some earlier videos about Winsome Resources, we have become intrigued by the prospect of our guest today at Power Metals, which has several lithium projects in Canada, but has made a uniquely high-grade discovery in another important critical mineral, cesium, which will be the main focus of today's discussion. Winsome Resources owns 19.5% of Power Metals, having opportunistically bought an initial stake when Canadian regulators forced China's Sinomine to sell its ownership interest in 2022. Winsome subsequently increased its stake through participation in an equity raise last year, and also by vending into Power Metals its Deselles and Mazarac properties in Quebec. We first heard of cesium from our past guest, Garrett Fueling, who had spent 28 years at Albemarle and its predecessors with responsibility for lithium, as well as Albemarle's highly profitable cesium business. As we'll learn today from CEO Hayden Daxter, cesium is a small but important critical mineral, which is essentially 100% controlled by China. Cesium, like lithium, is not super rare in the Earth's crust, but to find economic, high-grade deposits, as Power Metals is found in Case Lake, is exceptionally rare. Like most niche metals, the market is highly opaque. Cesium is not readily traded in commercial quantities, and there is little publicly available data on supply, demand, and pricing. But we have uncovered from the USGS, as well as Shanghai metals markets, and a recently published NI 43101 report and ASX announcements for some other cesium developers, that the market could be broken down into three segments at the following prices: cesium oxide, which trades at about $14,000 a ton, cesium formate, which trades about $50,000 a ton, and cesium carbonate, which trades at $170,000 to $190,000 a ton. Rodney and Hayden will discuss current drilling and plans for a maiden resource and preliminary economic studies in the near future. But as we've come to understand, mining CapEx for Power Metals should be in the tens of millions rather than the hundreds of millions or billions, as in the case of lithium, and it can be brought to market relatively quickly. For disclosure purposes, you should know that Rodney and I are strategic advisors to and hold equity interests in Power Metals. We are not, of course, financial advisors. This video is for information purposes only, and nothing said here should be considered investment advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video. Note that a written summary of this interview will be published in the next edition of RK Equity's Lithium Ion Bull. Please register your email at rkequity.com if you'd like to receive this newsletter directly to your email box. And please make sure to like this video, subscribe to Rockstock Channel, and leave a question or comment below. What do you think of Hayden and Power Metals prospects? What other companies or niche metals might you be interested to hear from on Rockstock Channel in the future? You could also email your thoughts at rockstockchannel@rkequity.com, or tag Rodney or me on X at RodneyHooper13 and at Lithium Ion Bull. As always, I'll introduce Power Metals with a brief synopsis of some key company attributes. Power Metals trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, ticker symbol PWM. It also trades on the OTC, PWRMF. Power Metals has a market cap of about 38 million Canadian dollars, or 28 million US dollars. Its current share price is about 25 Canadian cents, the same price it started the year, but down nearly 50% since its 52-week high of 48 cents reached in April. Power Metals' most recent equity raise was March of last year, raising 6.5 million Canadian dollars in flow-through financing at 57 Canadian cents per share, led by Canaccord Genuity. As of their last filing, May 31st, Power Metals had 4 million Canadian cash on the balance sheet. You can follow Power Metals on X at Power Metals Corp, and they also post regularly on LinkedIn. And with that intro, welcome Hayden to Rockstock Channel. Why don't you start a bit of your background and what attracted you to become CEO of Power Metals earlier this year, and then Rodney will get into the questions.
Thank you, Howard, and it's a pleasure to be joining the team at Rockstock today. Initially, I began tracking, Case Lake and lithium prospects in Canada almost 5 years ago, I was part of an Australian listed company that was gold, lithium, and graphite. And at the time, we began to track lithium properties, I guess, in 2019. And Case Lake was one of those properties that I kept an eye on. And then sort of fast forward into 2022, post-COVID, I've met with the team at Power and sort of had some discussions around coming on board at that point in time. So, I'd finalised a bit of work at the gold project that I was working at, and then sort of February of this year commenced at Power Metals.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hayden. Let's jump into some questions. We're always very positive and keen on ex-China critical mineral deposits. Cesium seems to have landed on their list. And in particular, we like tier 1 jurisdictions and deposits that are globally competitive in both quality and economics. It looks like Case Lake fits that bill. Can you just give us a little bit of background on the discovery of the deposit and the cesium side of it?
Yeah, certainly, Rodney. I believe it was 2018 that the team at Power Metals was discovering drilling for lithium, and at that point in time they highlighted that they had some high grade cesium. Just in what they call West Joe Dyke at the time. That was then followed up with a few further holes and highlighted that, a new dike that they had discovered at the time was containing some high-grade cesium as well as high-grade lithium and tantalum. That is then followed up with a drill program in 2019, again in 2022, and then now we're on our second drill program for 2024, which is targeting that high-grade cesium.
So clearly, the potential was there from quite early on because Sinomine is a key player in cesium and operates Tanco. And they were a shareholder of yours, as Howard mentioned, until they were required to divest. So clearly, they have understood the potential of Case Lake, for cesium.
That's right. They held that offtake agreement at Case Lake and were subsequently asked to depart Canada and relinquish that holding, which Winsome purchased at the time. But they saw the value in Case Lake. And initially in 2018, when the company first discovered the high-grade cesium, Albemarle also conducted a site visit at the time.
And many of our investors and listeners will be familiar with the Tanco mine. I personally didn't realize how long that had been in operation, since the mid-late 90s. Where do things stand now with them, and how much longer can they keep going in terms of mining cesium?
Yeah, it's a well-established and old mine, the Tanco one, and when you look at it, it's we know that there's probably over 100,000 tons of cesium left in the ground there, potentially more. The issues that we hear is that the majority of the deposit currently sits under the lake at present, and the primary pillar that supports the mining process is compromised, and we believe that there could be a small amount of mining or very limited mining to date, which has an impact on the supply of oxide to China to produce those chemicals.
And just from a logistics perspective, how far is Tanco from Case Lake, give or take?
So it's basically they're on the eastern side of Manitoba and we're on the eastern side of Ontario, so it's 1,000 kilometres.
Okay. Which in Canadian terms is neighbours. So with cesium being on the critical minerals lists, can you outline for us some of the downstream usages and why it would find itself on the critical minerals list?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it currently, as we understand it, sits on the critical minerals list in the US, Canada, Australia, and Europe. Main usages of cesium at present is oil and gas, which is the cesium formate. It's used for high pressure drilling. There's also cancer treatment technology, solar technology, GPS satellite detection. The US government uses it for military technology and night vision and a lot of other missile detection systems. So there's a lot of applications at present, but the one thing that we've noticed in a lot of our research is that there's very little R&D work being done. And when someone can find, an oversupply of cesium to do R&D and they test a few aspects, they come up with it as a very versatile and useful product.
Okay, great. So just on that, what we find with quite a few commodities is as prices run, alternatives, pop up and different solutions or thrifting and so on. Is there anything that would put cesium at a replacement risk that they could potentially, pivot out of and use instead?
No, I guess there's a lot of usage around potential uses in the chemical industry with rubidium and a couple of other similar minerals, but none of them have the qualities of cesium. So it's quite a unique and quite a sought after mineral.
Okay, great. So, the one thing that I think, stood out for me with Case Lake and for you Power Metals is how few meaningful high-grade cesium deposits there've been. A lot of it you've seen, if it's mined, it's like as a byproduct or secondary, whereas the actual high-grade operations, there've been far fewer than I thought. Can you just discuss and let the listeners know and get a real sense of what operations have been in the past and the grade of what you discovered so far at Case Lake, and sort of highlight how rare that actually is?
Yes, certainly. I mean, historically, high-grade cesium resources that have been mined to date across the planet has been three. One in Western Australia, Sinclair, that was mined in 2019. Bakita in Zimbabwe, that was mined out by 2005. And then Tenko, which in Manitoba is still there, but it has a lot of environmental issues at present, are the three only high-grade cesium deposits globally that have produced minerals. The grade rates from, 5 up to 15, 20%, and we've seen intercepts of 25% at present from our last round of drilling, which is very good. So we're confident that Case Lake will be the world's fourth cesium deposit, and, we're pushing forward at present with the drilling on that.
And that's a great lead in. So how, you've had your past drilling campaign. How's the latest drilling campaign going? And can you give a sense of when we can expect an initial mineral resource estimate?
Yes, certainly. Drilling commenced just over a week ago, so it's progressing ahead of schedule, which is fantastic to hear. It's great weather. The guys are doing a fantastic job out there. This program will be 2,500 meters or thereabouts, focusing on the cesium aspect on the property. Once that's completed, we will then put all of that data into conducting the work to push towards our maiden resource. Hopefully towards the end of this year, but I guess with the small team we have, we'd probably look at early next year at this stage for that resource. Also, in conjunction with that resource, Rodney, we're putting together a load of metallurgical test work that is underway, and we're hoping to have the results of that by the end of the year on the separation of the minerals, getting the cesium, the tantalum, and the lithium out together, separating those and see how they come up, and then also putting a load of test work to produce a series of formates hydroxide and carbonate from the cesium.
And so Hayden, tons for dollars drilling is really favorable for you, given that the deposit seems really near surface. Would the plan be to sort of cut off and get a permit and see if there's more to come, or would you look to delineate as close to the full potential as possible and then proceed from there?
The plan at this stage is this year we'll complete what we can for resource work, test work, and then next year is start permitting and getting, I guess, the process in place to develop what we have. We have a number of other drill targets, exploration targets on the property that are showing very similar cesium signatures under the geophysics that require winter drilling only. So we'll have to wait for those. The plan at this stage would be to advance what we have by the end of this year and then get back into more exploration later.
Okay, great. And you mentioned the metallurgical test work, how it discussed it briefly in the introduction in terms of the market and cesium essentially being pretty small. Do you have a sense of a clear preference from downstream buyers as to what product they would need, and then I guess compare that to your metallurgical test work results and see what is the optimal product for the deposit?
Yeah, it's a good question, Rodney, and it's something we'll await to see from the test work that is being conducted at the moment with SGS in Canada. At present, we've had discussions with a number of various companies, and they've all highlighted that they would prefer 2 or 3 of the chemicals that we know to date in the formate and the hydroxides. We've had some discussions on carbonate with another company, and I guess another one looking at just the straight oxide. So that's why we want to run a bit of a course with the metallurgical works and see which performs the best from our product, and then go from there.
So just in line with that, do you have a sort of a sense of what the size of the global market is for cesium, and how big Case Lake would be, in size relative to the total market?
Well, I think to date there's been, from the 3 high-grade resources that have been mined, there's been around 300,000 tonnes of cesium pulled out of those. And we would like to think that we would have something over 10% of that when we look at putting out our resource. From there, I guess the global market scale for cesium is in the tens of billions at present, from what we can understand. So Korea, Japan, China is the dominant force because they're the processing powerhouse. But Albemarle, 15 years ago, controlled 95% of the world's cesium. It's had a very dynamic shift to China at present.
Yeah, so that's, that is interesting in terms of tying in, because it seems, looking at past commentary on the mines that you mentioned, they can get mined out really quickly, potentially
Yes.
under a year. So that's awesome from a net, asset value perspective and cash flows. But has the past kind of been they mine it out and then you can warehouse it? It's something that you can store and then sort of feed into the demand supply, or how does it work?
Usually, because of the nature of cesium and how it's becoming incredibly critical, it'll be mined out and then stored and stockpiled and then used by these chemical companies as and when required. Securing, I think, the supply and the offtake for a number of companies is becoming ever increasing, with a greater demand and virtually no global supply at present.
Okay, great. So in terms of CapEx costs, I would say, lithium operations, especially if they're chemical operations, are really expensive. But again, historically, looking at some of those mines that you mentioned, the CapEx costs were incredibly low. It is near surface. It is high grade. So you're not moving, I presume, a lot of waste material. How, where would that look? Obviously, you still got to run the numbers and do the studies, but Case Lake also looking to be a low CapEx and OpEx producer.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rodney. We understand from the team at Sinclair. I've met with the team that previously conducted the operations and mining at Sinclair, and they informed us that their operating costs for mining all in was around $10 million to get that out of the ground. It was a very small deposit. It was mined out in 3 months. But they spent a bit of money getting down to that. They had to mine down to a depth of 30 meters to tap into that. It was a flat-lying deposit, whereas Case Lake is basically outcropping at surface and plunges down steeply at present. So, we would think that tens of millions of dollars, given the current cost of logistics and fuel pricing since 2019 has gone up. But we feel that it's in the tens of millions of dollars when we conduct our studies.
Which is great. And on that note, given how quickly it can be mined and cheaply, it's likely, given the mineralogy, that it's going to be low impact. Does this help or accelerate the permitting process for you?
It does. It's very low impact. The environmental aspect is good. We've been working together with our First Nation partners on the ground extensively this year, and will continue to do so. The Ontario government also has an early stage advanced mining permit that a lot of companies are not taking advantage of at present, which would hopefully facilitate us to be able to, once put in place, be mining within an 18-month period we would aim for.
Right. So that leads into my next question in terms of where are you with the environmentals and with the First Nations engagement? Is that matching that kind of timeline?
It is. It's very good. We've initiated water sampling. We've conducted that in conjunction with the First Nation partners. We've conducted training with them. We've recently finished an archaeological study, which is phase 2 on the property, and we'll move into another rounds early next year. We have a second round of water sampling to be conducted in October before everything freezes. So that's progressing exceptionally well at present. And it's, when I first looked at Case Lake, there's 3 things I look at in a project, and there's geologically, is there something there that's substantial and can form a resource and is economic? Is the logistical side of things, can we get into the property? And the third one is the First Nations. Has there been the right work conducted so that things can happen? And I think we're in a very good place with that.
Okay, that's great. So I guess as you move forward, there are some possibilities. If the CapEx costs are low, might you be able to get away with no equity dilution and doing some kind of a funding structure, which, what is the ideal funding route, and how would Winsome potentially, your strategic partner, fit into that picture?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and we've been in discussion now since I first began in February with various companies on offtake, on partnering with the advancement of the project, given the value in the cesium and how critical it is. Winsome holding 20% of us plus the offtake rights would see them, value greatly from us being able to perform a deal where we can bring in either a JV or equity where there's zero dilution to the shareholders.
Okay, great. And just lastly, Hayden, when can we expect to see some assays on the latest drilling?
We're about to send the first batch off to the lab in the next couple of days. So, and given I think in this current market, there's not a great deal of people drilling out there. We would hope that 6 weeks would be the maximum. One of the it's not I guess a flaw with the current system, but there's not a lot of people testing cesium, so it's a very stringent process. It's not like running a lithium assay or a gold assay or a copper assay where everyone can do it. It's quite a precise and specialized regime that we have to conduct, and we want to ensure that we've got continuity consistently with our results.
So who would be doing that work for you?
SGS is currently conducting
Okay.
all of our work and has been for some time, so we want to remain with the same laboratory so that we're seeing same process, same results coming through.
And the timeline on the metallurgical test work?
Ore sorting work is commenced in Australia. That will then go back to SGS in Canada, and we hope that in mid-October to see some results and sort of a draft back to the team here, and then before the end of the year, definitely we'll have the complete report and results out on all of the metallurgical test work, separation work that we would have conducted.
Okay, great. Howard?
All right, thanks for that, Hayden. There's a couple of more questions. I think the company has been historically more known for lithium. If you can maybe talk a little bit about some of the lithium projects, and the stock went up a fair bit at the beginning of the year, like in April, soon after you joined. That also seemed to coincide with, Winsome stock rose when they had this Renard acquisition, but, there's connectivity to Winsome, but in reality, Cesium might kind of drive value at Winsome rather than Winsome Renard driving value, in power metals. So if you could just, talk about, I guess, some of your lithium development properties as well, and yeah, what do you think? Like, from an investment proposition, we became involved in this, because obviously Winsome is involved. Our viewers know we've been connected to Winsome, for quite some time, and we've come to know you, Hayden. So I just wanted to understand, obviously there's a strong relationship between the two companies, but you do have lithium projects, and from a stock point of view, this is one of the first, I think, opportunities that we're discussing, kind of like Cesium, as a value driver. But yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about stock price, performance, volume, and just the lithium versus Cesium dynamic.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Howard. I think, when I first commenced, we just started drilling, and that was around the same time as the Renard deal was being put on the table. And I think it probably is. It coincides with a bit of a bounce in the reverse way of, Winsome doing well and us commencing drilling and putting out, I guess, regular updates, communication, and having a clear strategy on how we're driving the project forward. At the same time, seeing our major partner in Winsome, purchase the Renard mine was also a bonus to us, as well as to themselves. On the other side of projects-wise, lithium, the Case Lake property that the Cesium sits on we recently conducted some structural and lithological interpretation work on there. There's probably 9 domes at present that's been pushed out to a couple more. A lot of those targets remain untested and something that we'll look at later in the year, probably be next year at this stage. And with that, we've also got 2 properties in Quebec that were part of our last arrangement with Winsome Resources, where they earned in up to just shy of the 20% there. So we've got the Decelles and Mazarac properties that are located not far from Val d'Or. We recently conducted a small field program to gain some understanding on the property, and the team's currently working through those. We also conducted a staking program just before I started I think the company conducted that in December of last year. So just south of Hurst, which is a couple of hours to the west of where the Case Lake property is, just next to New Brunswick's grounds. The team staked a small parcel of prospective ground there that we're actually yet to get on the ground and test. So in total, we have 4 projects, 2 in Ontario, 2 in Quebec. The main focus and target is on the lithium. And currently we're sort of working our way through adding value with the cesium.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hayden. I think we'll conclude there. Hayden, thank you very much for the update. And, as we said, cesium, niche metal, Rodney and I, as we've come to understand this story, decided we wanted to become, involved with the company and, look forward to the additional drilling results and assays and mineral reserve estimate and the economic studies to get a much better sense of what the value here can be to shareholders. So appreciate your helping put it on our viewers' radar screen.
No, excellent. Thank you very much for your time, Howard and Rodney. It's a pleasure to catch up again and look forward to seeing you again soon.